The man had everything money could buy, yet the moment that would shatter his carefully built world arrived on an ordinary morning, under a harsh daytime sun, on a crowded city sidewalk where he least expected it. Cars rushed past, horns echoed, and people hurried by without looking down, when a small hand suddenly tightened around his fingers and refused to move. In that instant, time slowed, wealth meant nothing, and a truth buried for years was about to rise from the dust of the street and strike his heart without mercy. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment right now. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Journal. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Armin Halim was known across the city as a powerful businessman, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and whose signature could change lives without him ever meeting the people it affected. He lived in a glass-filled penthouse where sunlight poured in every morning, reflecting off polished floors and expensive furniture. Since the passing of his wife years ago, Armin had poured himself into work, convincing himself that success was the only way to protect his young son from pain. He believed discipline, structure, and ambition were the best gifts a father could give. Love, he thought, was shown through security, not softness. Every weekday morning, Armin walked his son, Zion, toward a private school just a few blocks from their apartment. Zion was a quiet, observant child with thoughtful eyes that noticed things most adults overlooked. While Armin spoke on calls or scanned messages on his phone, Zion watched the city wake up. He saw shopkeepers lifting shutters, street vendors arranging fruit, and tired workers sipping tea on plastic stools. He also noticed the people no one else seemed to see, especially those sitting on the pavement with bowed heads and worn clothes. On this particular morning, the sunlight was strong, casting sharp shadows on the road. As they approached a traffic signal, a woman sat near a lamppost, wrapped in faded fabric, her hair uncombed, her face marked by exhaustion rather than age. A small metal bowl rested in front of her, holding only a few coins. Armin noticed her presence for less than a second before instinctively turning his gaze away. He had trained himself not to look, not because he was cruel, but because looking made him uncomfortable. It reminded him of a life he had escaped, a vulnerability he refused to feel again. Armin tightened his grip slightly and kept walking, pulling Zion along with him. In his mind, this was normal. He paid taxes, donated to charities through his company, and provided employment to hundreds. He believed that was enough. He told himself that stopping would only invite trouble, questions, and emotions he did not have time for, but Zion stopped, the child's feet planted firmly on the ground, causing Armin to stumble slightly in surprise. Annoyance flashed through his thoughts as he turned back, ready to urge his son forward. That was when he noticed Zion's face. The boy was not scared or confused. His eyes were wide, fixed on the woman by the lamppost, filled with a recognition that seemed far beyond his years. The world around them kept moving, but Zion did not. He gently loosened his hand from his father's grip and took a small step back, staring at the woman with trembling intensity. Armin felt a strange irritation rise in his chest, mixed with embarrassment as passers-by glanced at them. He was about to insist they move on when he followed his son's gaze more carefully. The woman slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met Zion's first, then drifted upward toward Armin. In that brief exchange, something shifted in the air. Armin felt a sudden, sharp ache behind his ribs, a sensation he had not felt in years. There was something hauntingly familiar in her expression, something that reached into a locked part of his memory. Zion's small voice broke the silence of Armin's thoughts, steady but filled with emotion. The words he spoke were simple, yet they struck Armin harder than any accusation ever could. His son had recognized the woman as his mother. Armin felt the ground tilt beneath him. His breath grew shallow as his mind raced, rejecting the idea even as his heart began to betray him. His wife, Sanaa, had not died, at least not in the way he had told himself. Years ago, after a bitter period of hardship and misunderstanding, she had left. Pride, fear, and anger had driven Armin to believe it was better to let her go than to admit his own failures. When she disappeared from his life, he told others she was gone forever, and eventually, he convinced himself it was true. But standing there in daylight, with the city watching and his son unmoving, Armin could no longer deny what his eyes were telling him. The shape of her face beneath the grime, the curve of her brow, the way her eyes softened when she looked at Zion, all matched the woman he had once loved deeply. Memories flooded back without warning. He remembered mornings filled with laughter in a small apartment when money was tight but hope was strong. He remembered promises made during sleepless nights and the moment pride had replaced patience. When his business struggled early on, Armin had blamed Sana for not understanding his ambition. She had begged him to slow down, to choose family over endless work. He had chosen success, believing love would wait. It did not. As Armin stood frozen, Sana's shoulders trembled. She had tried to remain invisible for so long, surviving day by day, telling herself that her child was better off without her broken presence. Life had not been kind. Illness, bad decisions, and the absence of support had dragged her down slowly, until the streets became her reality. Yet even then, she had avoided places near Armin's world, terrified of this exact moment. Zion's recognition shattered the fragile wall she had built around her heart. Armin felt shame burn through him as people slowed to watch. In that moment, his wealth felt meaningless. He realized that while he had built towers of success, he had failed at the simplest responsibility of listening and forgiving. His son had carried a truth inside him that Armin had buried under contracts and numbers. Slowly, Armin stepped closer. The noise of the city faded as he knelt down, ignoring the dirt and stares. For the first time in years, he truly looked at Sana, not as a problem to be avoided, but as a human being shaped by pain, just like him. He saw how thin she was, how tired her eyes looked, and how fiercely she tried to hold herself together. Zion moved closer too, his small hand reaching towards Sana with trust that broke Armin's heart all over again. In that instant, Armin understood something that no business success had ever taught him. His son had inherited compassion, not from wealth or privilege, but from a mother who had endured suffering without losing her humanity. The minutes that followed changed everything. Armin did not care about meetings, schedules, or public image anymore. He knew that ignoring this moment would haunt him forever. The hardest challenge he had ever faced was not building an empire, but dismantling the walls he had built around his own heart. As the sun climbed higher, Armin helped Sana stand. It was not a gesture of rescue or control, but one of acknowledgement and responsibility. He realized that redemption did not come from grand gestures alone, but from humility and consistent care. The path ahead would not be easy. Trust had been broken, years had been lost, and healing would take time. They left the sidewalk together, not as a perfect family, but as people willing to try again. Armin arranged immediate medical care for Sana, not out of guilt, but out of love he had denied for too long. Zion stayed close, his presence a quiet reminder of why this mattered. In the days that followed, Armin began to restructure not just his schedule, but his values. He spent less time chasing deals and more time understanding the emotional world of his child. Sana's recovery was slow. There were moments of doubt, pain, and silence. Yet each morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the modest home Armin chose over luxury, reminding them that healing often begins in simplicity. Zion flourished, finally able to hold both parents' hands without confusion or fear. The child's quiet strength became the glue that held fragile pieces together. Armin learned that wealth could open doors, but only compassion could keep them open. He began supporting shelters not just with money, but with presence, ensuring dignity for those society ignored. He told Zion the truth about mistakes, teaching him that being strong did not mean being flawless. Just before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please take a moment to comment one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. As time passed, the memory of that daytime sidewalk remained etched in Armin's heart as both a wound and a blessing. It reminded him that life could change in a single moment, and that sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. Sana found purpose again, not as someone saved, but as someone seen and valued. Zion grew up witnessing forgiveness in action, learning that love could survive even the deepest fractures. If this story touched your heart, if it made you pause and reflect on the people you may have overlooked, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to Kindness Journal to keep stories of hope and humanity alive. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one child's courage, and one act of kindness to change everything.